Before we get into the sort of meat of this policy, it is worth saying that it is on the edges of legality, it is diplomatically toxic, and it is probably unworkable. This is in fact about signalling. It is about the Home Secretary sending a signal to her cabinet colleagues, to the electorate, and also to would-be migrants and refugees themselves. Because if one of these pushback happens out on the channel and the images of that go viral, that will send a very distinctive signal to those migrants and refugees who may want to come to Britain in this way. The big question now is, will even one of these pushbacks actually happen?
Don't shoot at the people.
The Libyans do it with guns.
Oh my god. Oh.
The Greeks have done it by cutting across dinghies. Now, commanders of British border enforcement vessels on the Channel will be given permission to push back migrant dinghies into French waters. The government say it will be done in a safe, legal way, but in reality, coercion or some form of violence will have to be used. The Home Office has been working on legal plans for some time to intercept and push back small boats. In fact, we understand that the training for maritime turnaround tactics is underway. But is it legal?
The proposal as such is illegal from a very specific perspective, which is that it seems not to entail the consent of France. The UK does not have an authority to, quote unquote, rescue migrants on small boats in the Channel and then disembark them in France without France's consent.
This afternoon, Border Forces Vigilant brings more migrants and refugees into Dover Port. Over 13,000 people have arrived like this so far this year. The reason it's happening? A mixture of refugee and maritime law. The latter dictates that you can't endanger lives at sea. The fear is that if you try to turn people back on dinghies, they'll resist, and therefore that will put lives at risk. We have not seen the legal advice the Home Office received, but it does stand up to scrutiny, according to officials. The Prime Minister and Home Secretary are acutely aware that these sorts of images will trigger a certain section of the electorate. They will see this as a sign of a country losing control of its borders rather than taking back control. So the Home Secretary has made a calculation. She's decided to push the legality of enforcement to its limits. She has also decided to risk diplomatic meltdown with the French. Because none of this works without them. The French Interior Minister responded on Twitter to the proposals. In the staid language of diplomacy, this was the equivalent to screaming expletives over your neighbour's fence.
France will not accept any practice contrary to the law of the sea, nor any financial blackmail. Great Britain's commitment must be kept. I made it clear to my counterpart, Priti Patel. The friendship between our two countries deserves better than postures which harm cooperation between our services.
So, aside from the politics, the legalities and the French, is it workable? The government acknowledges that this will only be used in limited circumstances, and there's a world of difference between the Home Secretary authorising pushbacks and ordering them. That will be down to frontline border force staff on boats. So, what will they do?
The captains, the ultimate decision on go, no go rests with the captain of the largest border force vessel there. I cannot see a circumstance where our captains would be coerced by the Home Secretary into breaking the law. I would hate to see a circumstance where that could occur.
The Home Secretary's predicament, talk of a reshuffle and genuine concerns about managing immigration. So, for example, the taxi driver who brought us to the pier today filmed this at Dungeness just yesterday. People rescued by the RNLI. And how many people got off the boat, would you say?
Top of my head, I would say about 40.
Some knelt in the shale and prayed. Then this woman walked over and went full hostile environment. Now, those images filmed by our taxi driver, who is Albanian, by the way, throw up two more interesting points for the Home Secretary. Number one, what happens when Afghans who are fleeing Kabul start coming over across the channel? And number two, what does this policy mean for organisations like the RNLI?
Porrick, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley, and I began by asking him if he understood French objections to the government's proposals.
No, not really. We offered them a substantial amount of money, £53 million, to actually up their patrols of their 60 miles of beaches, which are the problem areas where boats are launching from. It's obvious they haven't quite fulfilled that contract. Obviously, they're doing some work and a number have been turned back, but it's really looking at less than 30%. So I'm not surprised the Home Secretary's upped the stakes on this.
I mean, a lot of people voted for Brexit because they like the government message of taking back control. How frustrated are you and others on the Conservative benches that the government seems to have completely lost control of this?
Well, I think these are things that are outside of their control. Of course, I do want to take back control. That was as you say, a very key message of Brexit. And because this is such a visual route, my email inbox is very full of very annoyed people. This is going on a daily basis and nothing seems to be done. I mean, I'll put it to you in very plain terms. People see that we've got a Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier and fleet rattling the cage in the South China Sea, but they find it rather incredible we can't stop a few dinghies coming across the channel. Something's got to give. This is a move by the Home Secretary, which I hope will work. But at the end of the day, Kathy, the French can solve this. We're happy to pay them to solve this, and they patently are not solving it.
But, you know, the suspicion remains that the Home Secretary is talking tough on this and she has no intention of delivering on it. I mean, look at the other things she's floated. Processing refugees on Ascension Island or in Papua New Guinea, wave machines, a floating wall in the Channel, housing people on retired ferries. None of this has happened, has it?
Well, no, I think you can be very sure that the walls in the Channel and all the rest of it. No, I don't think they were ever serious. I think that was a part of a report she asked her civil servants to come up with it's time for blue sky thinking, and some of that blue sky thinking was mad before it started, of course. But the prospect of processing in a third country, I'm afraid, does have legs. Because if that is where you end up, I don't know where it is or what discussions are taking place with countries around the world, but if people who are trying to get here realise that they end up in a third country nowhere near Europe, they may just decide that staying in Germany and France is probably the better option in the first place. Because let's be honest, Kathy, they are not escaping from somewhere dangerous when they're in France. I mean, that really has to be very patently clear.
You've spoken of your frustrations and your constituents' frustrations about what's happening, but you're blaming the French. Do you not accept that the Home Secretary herself bears some responsibility for this? She's been in the job a while now. She should have fixed it, shouldn't she?
Well, I think with the weave of international law, I'm not entirely sure this is solvable within the legal framework we currently have. Hence why we're having the new Nationality and Borders Bill, which will address a glaring error and problems in this complex weave of protocols and agreements and international law, maritime law, safety at sea, and all of the rest of it. This bill is trying to solve that. But the trouble is with this bill is that it won't be enacted. It's got to go through the Commons, the Lords, backwards and forwards, and all the rest of it, as you're very familiar with, probably won't be in place until the spring of next year. And all the while, we're having huge numbers coming across the Channel.
And just finally, there's a reshuffle coming up. Everybody knows that. The Home Secretary, it's been suggested her job could be on the line because of the failure to control the number of migrants coming across the Channel. Is that fair? Would you like to see her stay or not?
Well, she is a very good Home Secretary with a very tough job. I like what she stands for. I've seen no evidence that she's going to be involved in any reshuffle. But what do I know on these things?
Craig McKinley, thanks very much. Well, I'm joined now by the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Why shouldn't France cooperate with this apparent new UK government policy of turning around boats?
Well, the policy is wrong-headed, it is appalling, it is putting life at risk, and it is quite possibly illegal. So the issue, by the way, of cooperation with the French authorities is one that this Home Secretary should be doing much better with, frankly. But let's be absolutely clear. This policy is an appalling one. It's putting lives at risk, and it's a sign really of the Home Secretary's chronic failure to deal with this issue that she's even suggesting it.
Well, the UK government says they've had legal advice that this could be legal in certain circumstances. But when you hear what Conservative MPs are saying, they've offered France £54 million. They offered them a plane. They're getting rather desperate, so they've upped the stakes. Isn't that fair enough?
No, it isn't fair enough, because this type of behaviour trashes Britain's reputation. But let me just deal with your point about legality. If the government is so confident about legality, let's see the government actually publish that legal advice so that we can all see it and be confident in it. But I was in Dover myself last Friday. I was speaking to law enforcement, speaking to the RNLI, speaking to refugee charities, and I've seen the work that's been done on the front line, people stepping up to the plate. The Home Secretary hasn't stepped up to the plate. She's offered France a sum of money, £54 million. She's now saying, it seems, that she doesn't want to hand that over. But the focus when the Home Secretary talks about the so-called deal with France is always about the coastal defences. It's about the fact that the French should be patrolling the coast. Now, of course, patrolling the coast is important, but it is also important that we realise that the business model of these vile people smugglers adjusts when they know that there are these things being done at the coast. And what they do is they move inland, they start to source the boats in a different way. So you have to have a joint working with the French. It doesn't just include a focus on the coast, but tackling and disrupting these people smuggling gangs further away as well.
But it's a problem that successive governments have wrestled with, including the last Labour government. So I just wonder what you would do differently if you were Home Secretary when you've got more than 1,500 people arriving by boat across the Channel just this week. What would you do?
Right, well, this has been a particular problem over the last 2 or 3 years. I would be doing 3 things as Home Secretary. Firstly, that effective deal with France, and that would be not just about the coastal patrols, it would be about joint working to tackle these vile people smugglers further away as well.
But she's tried that. She's tried that. And she's saying she's not getting cooperation from France.
No, she hasn't tried that. She has been trying to pour money in for coastal patrols principally. It's about much more than that. It's about joint working to tackle these gangs far further away, actually, from the coast than she is doing. People become refugees hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away, and are in the hands of vile people smugglers. So it's doing a lot more to tackle that further away as well. Secondly, safe and legal route. Hang on, Kathy, you asked me what I would do. That's the first thing. The second thing is about safe and legal routes. The government closed down the Dubs scheme, named after Alf Dubs, that actually would have given refuge to 3,000 unaccompanied children, close it down after just 480. They also need to focus on that. And thirdly, by the way, they must revisit their short-sighted decision to abolish the Department for International Development that actually tackled the reasons why people become displaced from their homes in the first place. They should thirdly reinstate that department too.
I just wonder whether that adds up to a policy, particularly given if you look at your last manifesto, 2019, there was not a single mention of the Channel crisis. Are people really to believe that you'd do any better?
Well, absolutely. We are under new leadership. I've been arguing for the 3 things I've just mentioned to you, Kathy, for some time. But in addition to that, as I've indicated, I've actually been down to Dover. I've seen the work that is going on the front line and seen, frankly, the failure of this Home Secretary, who's actually had 2 years to try and solve this and has failed.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, thanks very much.